My name is Lila Evans, and if you knew me 5 years ago, you wouldn't recognize the woman standing here now. You'd think you did, you'd say, oh, that's the girl who never stayed in one place, the one who ran from everything and everyone. The second things got too real. You'd say I was restless, reckless, unreliable. You'd be right, but you wouldn't know the whole story. You wouldn't know what it feels like to wake up every morning and wonder if the walls around you are strong enough to keep you from slipping back into the emptiness you came from. You wouldn't know what it's like to sit at the edge of your bed, shoes on, bag packed, heart pounding, just waiting for an excuse to leave before someone else does it first. So yes, my name is Lila Evans. And I am not who I was, but I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be now either. All I know is that the only thing standing between me and another locked gate is a gorilla named Kato. And the terrifying part? I think he knows more about me than any human ever has. I didn't come here to find him. I didn't come here to find anything, really. It was supposed to be just another job. Another city. Another way to stay invisible while pretending to help people who'd never remember my name. I work at the city zoo, or I guess you could say I volunteer. Education coordinator, they call it, which sounds fancier than it is. Mostly, I herd second graders away from the snack bar and tell them why tigers don't belong in backyards. I passed the primate enclosure a dozen times before I ever really saw him. It was the 4th week of October, the wind sharp enough to make the oak trees rattle like bones. I was halfway through a tour with a group of bored teenagers, the kind who roll their eyes at everything you say but secretly hope you'll give them something worth remembering. We stopped at the glass wall where the sign read Western Lowland. Gorilla, Kato. He was sitting there, perfectly still, arms folded like boulders, dark eyes fixed on something far away. Or maybe someone, Miss Evans, one of the kids called. Why is he looking at you like that? I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, Kato wasn't staring into space, he was staring straight at me. The hairs on my arms prickled up. And I forced a laugh. He's probably wondering if I brought him lunch, I said, but that wasn't it. I knew it wasn't. Because when the group moved on, the kids bouncing down the path toward the seals, I lingered. I turned back once, just to see if maybe he'd moved on too. He hadn't. He was pressed closer to the glass now, massive. Knuckles resting in the dirt, eyes so dark and deep they made my chest feel too tight. I don't know what made me lift my hand and press my palm to the glass. Maybe I was testing something. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't imagining it. But the second my skin touched that cold barrier, Kato shifted closer, so close his breath fogged a tiny patch of glass opposite my hand. I should have felt silly. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I stood there until my radio crackled in my pocket and snapped me back to the world where people don't stare at gorillas like they're confessing secrets. That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, listening to the neighbor's TV through the thin wall. I tried to forget his eyes, the way they held me there, pinned like a moth under glass. But every time I closed mine, he was there, waiting. The next day, I told myself I was just passing through. I didn't have a tour. No kids, no schedule. I was supposed to be restocking the education center. Instead, I found myself standing in front of his enclosure again, a paper cup of cold coffee in my hands. That he was there, same spot, same heavy quiet. But this time, when he saw me, he rose. And that simple motion, all that weight and power shifting so deliberately, made my heart slam against my ribs. He moved to the glass, lowered his head, and looked at me like he was asking a question. I didn't know how to answer. I stayed longer than I should have. Long enough that Jo, the senior keeper, found me standing there like a statue. She leaned on the railing beside me, her arms full of fresh greens. He likes you, she said, almost teasing. I snorted. Doesn't he like everyone with food? Jo shook her head, serious now. Kato doesn't waste his time. He watches people, sure, but not like this. Not like he's waiting. Her words echoed in my head for the rest of the day. Waiting for what? I wanted to ask. But Jo was already gone, whistling toward the kitchen where the chimpanzees were banging on the walls for lunch. Days bled into weeks. I made excuses to pass by his enclosure, early mornings, late afternoons. Sometimes I brought my sketchbook, pretending I was practicing animal studies for a brochure redesign that didn't exist that he'd be there. Always. And when he wasn't, I'd feel this stupid pang of disappointment in my chest that made no sense. At all point one day, I caught my reflection in the glass beside him. My face looked pale, tired, older than 29. But his eyes, deep, endless, were so close behind the glass that for a second, I imagined we were the same creature. Both stuck behind invisible walls. Both waiting for something to crack. I thought I knew the limits. I thought the glass was the line. That thick sheet that said you're human, he's not. You stay here, he stays there, but life has a way of pushing you right up against the edges you swore you'd never cross. It was a Saturday when it happened. The zoo was closing early for a storm, big gusts, low clouds swirling like bruises over the city. I should have been home, but instead, I was there again, standing in front of his empty enclosure as rain pelted the pavement. I almost turned back. Then I saw him. Not inside, not by the glass. He was huddled under the small covered shelter deep in the enclosure, a dark mass against the storm. My chest clenched so hard I had to grab the rail to keep my balance. I don't know why I did it. I swear I don't. But the side gate, the one the keepers used to toss fresh food when the chute jams, was open. Maybe not locked right in the rush to close for the storm. Maybe the latch just never caught. One step. That's all it took. One step through that narrow gate, and the world on the other side swallowed me whole. The air felt different in there. Thicker, alive in a way that made my skin prickle. I could smell the wet hay, the old earth, the storm pressing down like a hand on my shoulders. Cato didn't move when I stepped in. His head was down, huge shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of something too big for me to see. I took another step. Then another. My boots sank into the muddy ground, each footfall too loud in the hush of the storm. I was maybe 20 feet away when he lifted his head, slowly, like a mountain waking from a long, heavy sleep. Our eyes met, and something inside me cracked so sharp and sudden that for a second, I thought it was the thunder. But it wasn't. It was me. It was the part of me that believed I could keep leaving before anything ever stuck. I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words died in my throat. Cato rose. All at once, he was standing, massive and dark against the gray sky, water dripping from his fur like the storm itself was trying to hold him down, and then he moved, not away. Not back. Toward me. I froze. The exit gate was right behind me, a crooked rectangle of metal and shadows. All I had to do was back out. All I had to do was remember that this was wrong, dangerous, stupid, but when I stepped back, Cato shifted. 2. One heavy footstep, then another, until his broad shoulders blocked the narrow exit completely. He didn't growl. He didn't pound his chest like the videos online. He just stood there, blocking the only way out. And then he lowered his head and looked me dead in the eyes, so close I could see the rain drip from his lashes like tears. For a moment, there was no storm. No zoo. No glass. Just him and me, alone in a cage I'd walked into myself, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to leave. I don't remember deciding to breathe again. I must have, because I didn't faint, didn't crumble into the mud at Cato's feet. Instead, I stood there, rain trickling down my collar, hands trembling at my sides while he stared at me, the same way he always had through the glass. Except now there was no glass. Nothing but open air and my own hammering heartbeat. For a moment, all I could think was you're inside his world now, Lila. There's nowhere to run this time. I could see every scar across his knuckles, the flecks of silver on his broad back, the mud clinging to the long hair on his arms. His chest rose and fell like a living drum. Every inch of him was alive and heavy and real in a way that made my skin hum with fear and awe. That he didn't move closer, not right away. He just blocked the exit with the silent certainty of something that knows its strength. There was no aggression in his eyes, only that steady, searching calm that had kept me coming back day after day. Cato. I heard my own voice, soft and foolish against the storm. I'm not supposed to be here. My fingers twitched at my sides, itching to reach out but too scared of what might happen if I did. Part of me still thought he'd turn away, give me the space to slip out the way I came in. But he didn't. He leaned his massive frame against the narrow gate, the steel creaking under his weight. There was no chance of squeezing by him now, not without pushing past all that muscle and silent, watching power. And I knew, with a strange, cold certainty, that if I tried, he'd step right back in front of me again. So I did the only thing I could think of. I lowered myself onto the wet ground, folding my legs under me until I was sitting in the cold mud, my knees drawn to my chest like I was a child hiding from a thunderstorm. He watched me settle there, eyes following every nervous shift. His breathing slowed, that low, rumbling sound like distant thunder rolling over hills I'd never climbed. When I looked up, he tilted his massive head, as if to ask, "Why did you come here?" The rain eased to a mist, soft enough to hear my own breath. I found myself talking, not because I thought he'd understand every word, but because the silence was too much to hold alone. "I didn't mean to come in here," I whispered. I don't know. I wanted to see you up close." "Stupid, right?" He blinked, one slow, deliberate motion. I could almost imagine him sighing. "I don't know why you keep looking at me like that," I went on, my voice breaking as I wiped rain from my eyes. "Like you see something worth staying for." "Nobody does that, Kato." "Not really." He shifted his weight, lowering himself to a squat, a mountain folding in on itself. One massive fist pressed into the mud, the other resting loosely against his thigh. His eyes didn't waver. "Neither did mine." "You shouldn't be alone in here," I said. "I shouldn't be alone in here." The wind rattled the trees beyond the enclosure, a branch cracking somewhere above us. Kato's ear twitched at the sound, but he didn't look away. If anything, he leaned in a fraction of an inch, but enough that I felt it like a weight in my chest. Minutes passed like hours. My legs ached from the cold seeping through my jeans, but I didn't dare shift. I was afraid the spell would break, that he'd stand and turn his back, or worse, that he'd force me out the way he'd blocked me in, but he didn't. Instead, he lowered himself fully onto his haunches, arms crossing over his knees, massive frame hunched like a giant trying to make himself small. I realized then how close we really were. 10 feet, maybe less. No glass. No bars. Just a breath of wet air between my fragile skin and his raw strength. I don't know what possessed me, but I lifted my hand, slow, trembling, like every movie I'd ever seen where the hero reaches out to tame the beast. Except this wasn't a beast. This was Kato, the one who'd watch me every day, who knew my shape and scent through layers of glass. My fingertips hovered inches above the damp ground between us. Kato's eyes dropped to my hand, then back to my face. He didn't move to meet me, but he didn't pull away either. "Is this okay?" I asked, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. Like he'd nod or grunt or give me some human answer. But maybe he did, in his own way. He didn't block me. He didn't stand. He just waited. Slowly, I leaned forward until my fingers brushed the wet grass inches from his massive knuckles. The heat radiating off him felt like a furnace against my cold, trembling hand. I didn't dare touch him. I knew better. But it was enough to feel that warmth drift through the space between us. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the metal fence behind him. I flinched, instinctively pulling my hand back. Kato's head snapped up, scanning the sky, then dropped back to me. His brow furrowed, the closest thing to worry I'd ever seen in an animal's eyes. "It's okay," I whispered, trying to steady my breath. "It's just the storm." Another boom. I jumped again, and this time my palm landed flat in the mud, closer to him than before. I was shaking so badly I didn't notice how close I drifted until his knuckles shifted toward me, just a few inches, but enough that the back of his hand brushed my wrist. The contact jolted through me like a second bolt of lightning. Not fear, not exactly, but something raw and electric that made my ribs feel too small for my lungs. I held my breath, waiting for him to pull back. He didn't. His fingers curled slightly, knuckles resting in the mud beside my own. He Was letting me stay. I wondered, wildly, if he felt my heartbeat the way I felt his warmth, steady, powerful, impossible to ignore. That we stayed like that while the storm raged overhead. Two creatures who shouldn't have shared the same patch of earth, breathing the same damp air. I don't know how long we stayed, 5 minutes, an hour, a lifetime compressed into the hush of rain and distant thunder. I don't know when the keeper's voice cracked through the spell. It was faint at first, muffled by wind and metal. Gates banging in the storm. Lila. Lila, where are you? J.O.M.Y. chest tightened. Reality crashed back in. The open gate, the broken rules, the stupidity of what I'd done. I glanced back at the narrow gate behind Cato, the gate I'd forgotten the second I stepped inside. Cato's head turned with mine. He knew. He knew that was my way out, but when I shifted, rising onto my knees, his massive shoulders moved too, just enough to block the exit completely, his bulk filling the frame like a living barricade. Lila. Are you in there? Joe's voice was closer now, urgent and sharp. I felt a flicker of panic. If she saw me in here, so close, so stupid, I'd lose everything. My pass, my access, maybe even my job. Cato. I whispered, voice cracking. Please. I have to go. He didn't move, but Joe's boots crunched closer. I could see her flashlight bobbing in the dark behind the fence, cutting through the mist and rain like a searchlight. Lila. I pressed my palm to the mud again, closer this time. I didn't touch him, not directly, but I could feel the heat of him, that silent, immovable force that said stay. Just stay, please, I breathed. They'll find me. His eyes flicked from my face to the gate and back again. For a moment, I swore I saw something like understanding in the depths of his dark gaze, something that said he knew exactly what he was doing, and exactly what it meant. Joe's flashlight hit the edge of the gate, sweeping over the latch I'd slipped through like a ghost. I held my breath. So did Cato. Then, with a slow, rumbling sigh, he shifted, just enough. A gap opened behind his shoulder, narrow but real. An exit. A choice. I didn't think. I didn't dare thank him out loud. I just rose, heart pounding, knees screaming in the cold mud, and slipped through that opening before he could change his mind. I stumbled back into the storm, the gate banging shut behind me. Joe was there, eyes wide, breath ragged. She didn't see him behind the bars, only me, dripping wet, mud to my elbows, a wild, stupid grin on my face. Where the hell were you? She demanded. I opened my mouth to answer, but my eyes drifted back to the fence, to the massive shadow watching me from the dark, and I realized then, the gate might be closed for now, but Cato had made sure I'd never truly leave. I wish I could tell you I slept that night. That I washed the mud from my hands, curled under my thin blanket, and let the storm outside drown out everything I didn't want to feel. But when you stand inches from something so big, so alive, when you step through the fence you swore you'd never cross, you can't just close your eyes and pretend you're the same person when you wake up. I lay there in the dark, fingers tracing the faint bruise on my wrist where Cato's knuckles brushed mine. It wasn't even a bruise, just a ghost of contact, a reminder that the glass between us hadn't always been there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the way he shifted to block the gate, the weight of his silence pressing against my chest. He could have hurt me. He could have shoved past me, charged through the open door, disappeared into the city like a shadow, but he didn't. He stayed. He kept me there with him. And when it mattered most, he let me go. I wanted to believe that meant something. Morning came too fast. The sun was bright again, cruelly bright, like the storm had never happened. I forced myself out of bed, dressed in the same jeans I'd caked with mud hours before, and walked back to the zoo before I could talk myself out of it. The gate was locked this time. Triple-checked. The staff huddled near the primate center, voices low, eyes flicking over me when I passed. I wondered if they knew, if they could smell the wrongness clinging to my skin like damp earth. That Jo found me by the education center, arms crossed over her zoo jacket. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Not yet, Lila. Her voice held that edge, the tone you use when you're trying to decide if someone's worth believing. I tried to smile. Hey, Joe. Where were you last night? I shrugged, too casual. I stayed to make sure the gates were secured. The storm, don't lie, she cut in, her tone softer than her words. I found the side gate to Cato's enclosure half open. Fresh mud tracks inside. You want to explain that to me? The lie bubbled up so fast it almost spilled out. Of me, I don't know, I wasn't there, must have been the maintenance crew. But her eyes pinned me in place the same way Cato's had. There was no room for pretending, I just wanted to check on him, I said quietly. The storm was so bad. He looked, Lila. Jo sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? How stupid. I did. Of course I did. But the word stupid didn't sit right in my chest. Stupid was the drunk teenagers who threw rocks at the enclosures on dares. Stupid was the people who pounded the glass and laughed when the animals flinched. What I did felt different. He didn't do anything, I said, voice so small I hated it. He just stayed with me. Jo lowered her hand, studying me. Like I was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. He's a wild animal, Lila. He's not your friend. He's not your secret. He's alone, I snapped, the word sharper than I meant it to be. A few heads turned our way, volunteers pretending not to listen. I forced my voice down. He's alone in there. All day. Every day. And you know what? So am I. The words landed harder than I expected. Jo's mouth opened, closed, opened. Again. I thought she'd yell. Or worse, that she'd tell me not to come back. Instead, she just let out a long, tired breath. If you want to help him, you stay outside the fence. You follow the rules. You don't climb in with a 400-pound silverback because you feel lonely. Do you understand me? I nodded. I didn't. Trust my voice not to crack, go home, she said finally. Get some sleep. Come back tomorrow, if you're ready to do it right. But I didn't go home. Not really. My feet carried me back to the edge of Cato's world like a tide I couldn't fight. He was there, of course he was. Near the far end of his enclosure, where the sun cut through the thin October clouds. He sat with his back to the glass, picking at a branch like it held the answer to a question he never asked. I stayed behind the barrier this time. My hands pressed to the cold metal rail, heart thumping so hard I thought he'd hear it through the earth. Hey, big guy, I whispered. He didn't turn right away. But after a moment, his massive shoulders rolled, that familiar, deliberate shift that made the breath catch in my throat. He rose, branch dropping from his fingers like a discarded thought. Step by step, he closed the distance to the glass. He didn't rush. He never did. It was like he wanted me to feel every inch of that approach, to remind me he came on his terms, and only his. When he settled in front of me, I could see the faint streak of dried mud along his forearm. Proof of the night we shared. Proof. I hadn't dreamed it. Sorry, I murmured, pressing my palm to the glass. I shouldn't have gone in. I know that now. His eyes flicked from my hand to my face, then back again. He shifted closer, so close his breath fogged the glass where my fingers rested. I imagined him thinking, you broke the rules. So did I. I visited him every day after that, but I stayed outside. I brought fresh fruit when Jo wasn't watching. Slipping orange slices to the keeper on duty with a wink and a whispered, it's for Cato. I sat on the cold metal bench and sketched him for hours, the curve of his shoulder, the quiet lines around his eyes, the way he watched the trees like they were windows to somewhere he used to be. Some days, he'd tap the glass when I looked away, a soft, hollow thud that made my pulse jump. It felt like a reminder, I see you. Don't forget I'm here. I didn't forget. I couldn't. A week passed before Jo trusted me enough to speak to me without that disappointed edge in her voice. She caught me one morning, hunched over my sketchbook. While Cato leaned against the glass like a dark statue. You're good at that, she said, nodding at my half-finished drawing. I shrugged. He makes it easy. She leaned on the railing beside me, eyes on Cato's broad back. You know he was born here, right? Never knew the forest. Never saw another troop, except the females we brought in for him. I didn't know what to say to that? Cato turned then, pressing one massive hand to the glass opposite mine. His fingers dwarfed mine, a fragile mirror of something we'd never touch. He doesn't trust people easily, Joe went on. You should know that's not normal. For him. For any of them. I swallowed. Why me? Joe shook her head. Maybe he sees something he recognizes. Something wild enough to sit with him in the rain. The words sank deep, settling in the quiet part of my chest where Cato's eyes always found me. I told myself I'd keep my distance. That I wouldn't cross the line again. That glass was enough, that his quiet presence pressed to my palm through cold, scratched acrylic would be enough to hold back the parts of me that wanted more, but late. At night, I found myself dreaming of that storm, of the way his knuckles brushed mine in the mud, the way he blocked the gate with a single shift of his shoulders. In the dreams, I didn't leave. In the dreams, he didn't let me. Sometimes, I wondered if he dreamed it too. It was Friday when the rest of the world crashed back in. I was setting up an exhibit near the education center, old bones, scattered feathers, scraps of laminated signs that smelled like bleach and old paper. A voice behind me made me jump so hard I nearly dropped a fossilized tooth. Miss Evans? A man stood there, crisp shirt under a cheap zoo badge, clipboard clutched like a shield. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked through me. Like I was a misplaced piece of furniture blocking his path. I'm with the board, he said. There's been a report. My stomach dropped. A report? He flipped a page, frowning at something scribbled in pencil. Someone says you were seen inside the gorilla enclosure during the storm. Is that true? My throat went dry. Behind him, through the open doors, I could see the outline of Cato's enclosure, the faint glint of sunlight on glass. I imagined him there, watching. Listening. I don't, Miss Evans, the man said sharply, snapping the clipboard shut. If you're going to stay here, you'll need to come with me now. We need to talk about your future at this zoo. Behind him, the glass shimmered with my own reflection, and somewhere beyond it, a dark shape shifted in the sun. Cato, still waiting, still watching. If you'd asked me the day before, I'd have sworn I was ready for anything. A reprimand, a fine, maybe a stern warning to keep my distance. I deserved that, I knew it. But as I sat alone in that cramped staff office, the stale scent of burnt coffee and old printer ink thick in the air, I realized just how small I was when people with clipboards and signatures were done pretending to be kind to the man from the board. He said his name was Mr. Halpern, flipped through my file like it was a script he'd read 1,000 times. Volunteer hours. Performance reviews. My application essay from when I first begged them for a chance to be here. All the desperate pieces of me, spread across cheap paper. He cleared his throat like he was about to recite a eulogy. Miss Evans, do you understand how serious this is? I nodded because my voice had curled up and died somewhere in my chest. You trespassed into a high-risk enclosure during an active weather emergency. You disregarded safety protocols that exist to protect you and our animals. Our animals. The words tasted sour. Cato wasn't theirs. Not really. Not the way he'd been mine. For those few silent, rain-soaked minutes, I forced myself to speak. I know I broke the rules. But Cato, he held up a hand, slicing through my words like a blade. Miss Evans, you are not a keeper. You are not trained to interact with dangerous animals. You are not qualified to make that kind of judgment. Dangerous. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so easy for him to use that word when all he'd ever seen of Cato was a checklist on a feeding chart. I'm sorry, I said instead. Because it was the only thing I could say that might keep me here, close enough to see those dark eyes through the glass one more time. Mr. Halpern clicked his pen once, twice, a metronome of my own regret. Your access is suspended, effective immediately. We'll review your volunteer status next week. Until then, you're not permitted on zoo grounds. The word suspended clanged in my skull like a dropped pan. Suspended. Not fired. Not banned forever. A thread of hope I could wrap around my shaking hands. I forced myself to nod. Forced myself to stand when he gestured to the door. Forced myself not to look back at the sketch pinned to the corkboard behind him, a photograph of Cato, old and faded, staring at the camera like he hated the flash. Outside, the wind slapped my cheeks red. The sky was cloudless, mocking in its brightness. I wanted it to storm again, wanted the cold rush of rain to drown out the hot. Shame burning behind my eyes, I should have gone home. Packed a bag, left the city the way I'd left all the others, no forwarding address, no goodbye. That would have been the old me, but the old me hadn't had someone waiting behind a sheet of glass. So, instead of going home, I slipped around the back of the education center, keeping to the hedges until the path curved toward the primate enclosure. The visitor lot was empty. Weekday mornings never drew crowds unless the weather was perfect, and today it was too sharp, too bright. I stopped at the far corner of the viewing area, half hidden by a bench and the dying branches of a sycamore. My heart slammed so hard I had to press my palm to my chest to steady it. There he was. Cato. Perched on the same boulder near the far end of the pen, arms folded across his massive knees. He looked like a mountain that had decided to sit and think for a while. The glass between us was smeared with sun and old fingerprints, families leaning in to snap pictures they'd forget by dinner. He hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe he had. I wanted to believe he'd felt me the second I stepped off the concrete path. I inched closer until my boots crunched over a stray pile of gravel. The sound snapped through the quiet like a shot. Cato's head lifted, slowly. So slowly, it made my breath catch in my throat. Those dark eyes locked on mine, same as always. Same as that night. I pressed my fingertips to the glass. Stupid, reflexive. He rose from the boulder, rolling forward on those massive knuckles, each step so heavy I could feel it in my knees. He stopped inches away, forehead tilting until the glass trembled with his breath. Hey, I whispered, voice cracking under the weight of everything I wasn't supposed to say. I'm not supposed to be here. His brow furrowed. A soft huff misted the glass between us. He lifted one hand, pressing his palm flat against the barrier opposite mine. Flesh to cold acrylic, the closest we'd ever get again. I'm sorry. I breathed. They said I can't come back. Not for a while. He blinked, slow, deliberate, the same way he'd done in the rain. I wondered if he remembered the storm. The mud. The way he'd stood between me and the world outside. I wanted to tell him I'd come back anyway. That I'd find a way past every locked gate, every board member, every lecture about rules and danger and distance. But the words tasted like lies before they left my tongue. Instead, I just stood there while he tapped the glass once. Twice. A soft drumbeat that felt like a question I couldn't answer. A voice cut through the hush like a blade. Miss Evans. I flinched so hard my palm slipped from the glass. I turned, and there was Joe, arms crossed, hair pulled back too tight, eyes narrowed in that way that made me feel 12 years old, and caught with my hand in the cookie jar. You're not supposed to be here, she said. Not angry, not yet, but dangerously close. I know, I whispered. Her eyes flicked to Cato, then back to me. You're going to make this worse. For him. For you. I wanted to argue. To scream that I wasn't the problem, that the glass was. That the distance between us was. But I saw the look in her eyes, the quiet plea to not make her the enemy too. I stepped back from the glass, hands raised like I was surrendering to something bigger than either of us. Maybe I was, Joe. I don't, she said gently, voice softening. I know you care about him. I do. But if you keep pushing, they'll move him. The words slammed into me like cold water. Move him. A new zoo. A new pen. New keepers who didn't know his quiet ways. New glass he'd press against, waiting for a face that would never come. You can't let them, I rasped. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then don't give them a reason. Go home. Stay away. Let me handle the rest. Behind the glass, Cato shifted, pressed closer. His forehead rested against the barrier like he could push through it with sheer will. I pressed my palm to my chest, fighting the burn in my throat. I wanted to stay. God, I wanted to stay instead. I turned. 1 step. 2. The weight of his eyes on my back heavier than any gate or lock they could ever build. I didn't go home. Not yet. I sat in my car, fingers clenched around the steering wheel until my knuckles burned. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview, eyes rimmed red, mouth pulled thin. I looked like someone caught between 2 exits, neither one open. I could run, the old me would have. I could pack up my sketchbooks, my clothes, the box of old letters I never read but couldn't throw away. I could slip out of the city before the board made it official. Or I could wait. For him. For Joe. For whatever chance might crack the glass. One last time, when dusk fell, I found myself back at the fence. Not inside, never again inside, but close enough that if I strained, I could see his shape in the shadows. He was near the back of the pen, half hidden by the old logs, his massive shoulders hunched like he was listening for something. I pressed my forehead to the cold steel. I'm still here, Cato, I whispered. I'm still here. A soft shuffle in the dirt. He lifted his head, eyes glinting in the last scrap of sun. He didn't come closer. He didn't have to, I swear, in that hush between day and night, when the wind slipped through the bars like a secret. I heard him breathe my name. The next morning the sky broke open in a thin, pale drizzle that clung to the zoo's cracked walkways and left the air smelling like wet leaves and iron. I shouldn't have been there. Not with my suspension hanging over my head like a loose branch ready to snap. But something about that word, suspended, kept echoing in my chest. Suspended meant waiting. Suspended meant not finished. Suspended meant there was still a thread connecting me to him, thin and frayed, but uncut. So I came back. Not through the main gate, that would have been too obvious. I parked 2 streets down, where the neighborhood kids left their bikes half buried in the dying grass and the streetlights flickered like old memories. I slipped through the staff lot, past the dumpsters that always smelled like stale popcorn and rotting fruit. My badge didn't work anymore, but the fence at the far end of the primate center had a gap where the wire bowed out just enough to squeeze through. I knew every inch of that place now, every blind spot in the cameras, every corner where you could stand unseen while the world went about its routines. The only thing I hadn't learned was how to leave it behind. I found Cato sitting at the far end of the enclosure, near the old logs stacked like broken bones against the fence. The viewing platform was empty, no chattering kids, no tired parents. Just him and the slow patter of rain dripping from the branches overhead. I didn't step closer right away. I stood at the fence line, hidden by the knot of low shrubs, watching the rise and fall of his broad back. He looked smaller. When he was alone, folded in on himself like a secret he wouldn't share. I wondered if he knew. If he could feel the shift in the air, the tension vibrating through the keepers who spoke too quietly when they passed by his pen, the way Joe avoided my eyes when she thought I might still be watching from the edge of the lot. I wondered if he could feel me now, breath snagging on the wire mesh, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the rain. I stepped closer. 1 foot, then the other. I counted each step like they were confessions. I'm here. I shouldn't be here. I'm here anyway. When I reached the glass, he didn't move at first. I pressed my palm to the cold pane, breath fogging a small circle that hid my eyes from his. Then I whispered his name, Cato. The shape shifted, a low roll of muscle under black fur. He lifted his head, shoulders turning like a door swinging open on rusted hinges. When his eyes found mine through the smear of my breath, my throat closed up so tight I couldn't speak. He came closer, slow as always. Each step pressed deep into the wet dirt until he was there again, right there, so close I could almost feel the warmth of him seeping through the glass. He lowered his forehead until it rested against the pane opposite mine. It struck me then, sharp as a cut, how thin that barrier really was. Inches of scratched acrylic between him and me. Between his world and mine. Between the part of me that had run all my life and the part that wanted, so badly, to stay. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes, maybe hours. I spoke in a hush only he could hear, nonsense really. Little pieces of myself I'd never trusted anyone else to hold. How I hated my father's silence. How my mother's voice still haunted the edge of every dream. How I didn't know if I'd ever be enough for a life that asked so much and offered so little that he didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Didn't judge. His massive hand lifted once, pressing flat against the glass above mine. A mirror. A promise I wasn't sure how to read. A sudden crackle of static snapped the spell. The keeper's radio, somewhere behind the viewing deck, crackling with a voice I couldn't quite catch. Cato's ears twitched. His eyes darted over my shoulder. Then back to me. He shifted his weight, a ripple of muscle and mud. A soft huff of breath misted the glass, then cleared. His eyes said at first, "You shouldn't be here." But his body stayed, unmoving, blocking the shallow curve of the pen where the staff gate latched shut each night. I knew what he was doing. I'd seen him do it once before, that night in the storm. He could stand like that for hours if he wanted to. He could turn his massive back to the whole world and make sure I stayed put until the threat passed, except this time, the threat was me. The static crackled again. Footsteps crunched on wet gravel behind the fence. Joe's voice. Calm, but tight around the edges. "Lila? I know you're here." I pressed my forehead harder to the glass, eyes squeezed shut like a child hiding from the dark. Cato shifted closer, his knuckles tapping the pane, soft, steady. A heartbeat. That Joe's shadow slipped around the corner. I heard her boots before. I saw her, that familiar, clipped rhythm that always meant trouble was a breath away. "Lila," she said again. "Closer now. Don't make this worse." I opened my eyes. Cato's face filled my whole world, dark eyes, deep lines carved by a lifetime behind fences and glass. I pressed my palm higher, desperate for him to feel it somehow. "Don't move. Don't let me go." He huffed again, the sound rumbling through the glass like a distant drum. Joe's reflection appeared behind mine, her rain jacket dripping onto the concrete, her eyes catching mine in the glass. "You can't keep doing this," she said, softer than I expected. "You know what they'll do if they catch you here again." I swallowed. My voice cracked like old ice. "They'll move him." Joe didn't answer right away. Her silence was answer enough. Behind the glass, Cato shifted. His massive hand lifted higher, fingertips brushing the pane opposite my forehead. For a moment, it looked like he was reaching through the glass, through the fence, through every rule that said we were supposed to stay in our separate worlds. I wanted to believe he could. That if I pressed hard enough, the barrier would crack, and we'd both be free, him from his pen, me from the empty rooms I kept running to. But the glass held it always did. Jo stepped closer, her reflection overlapping Cato's like some ghostly thread I couldn't shake. "You need to leave, Lila," she said. Not a demand this time, a plea. For him. "If you stay, they'll have no choice. He's too important. Too valuable." Valuable. The word burned my tongue like poison. I looked back at Cato. He held my eyes, steady and dark and unflinching. I swear, in that moment, he knew exactly what leaving meant. He knew I wouldn't come back. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not ever, if they had their way. Another tap of his knuckles. Another hush of breath. "Don't run," those eyes said. Not from me. I don't know what broke first, my resolve or my heart. Maybe they cracked at the same time. I lowered my hand from the glass, leaving a smudge of warmth that faded almost instantly in the cold drizzle. Cato leaned forward, pressing his massive forehead where my palm had been, a silent echo of a touch that never really happened. I stepped back. 1 foot. 2. The gap between us widened like a wound. He didn't move to follow. He just stayed pressed to that smudge of breath and warmth, his dark eyes tracking mine until Joe's shoulder slipped between us like a shutter. Coming down, she guided me away with a hand on my elbow, gentle but firm. Neither of us spoke until the enclosure disappeared behind the bend in the path. Even then, all she said was, "I'm sorry." I wasn't sure who she meant, me or him. They didn't arrest me. They didn't drag me out in handcuffs or post my name on a blacklist for the next zoo to see. They just made it clear, "Don't come back. Not now." Not ever. I packed my things that night. Old sketchbooks, half-finished notes, the jacket that still smelled faintly of mud and rain. I closed the door on my tiny apartment and slipped into the darkness before I could change my mind, but when I reached the end of the street, I didn't keep driving. I sat there instead, car idling, headlights off, staring at the soft glow of the city where Cato waited behind glass and steel. I wondered if he'd still press his forehead to the pane tomorrow. If he'd tap it once, twice, asking a question. No one would answer. If he'd wait for a shape that would never come, I wanted to believe he wouldn't. That he'd turn away, find some patch of sun to sleep in, forget the foolish girl who couldn't keep the promise she made when she stepped through that fence, but in my heart, the part that would never be behind glass, I knew better that he'd block that exit forever, and in a way, so would I.